Welcome everyone to week 2 of our 6-week class on the quality of attention. And this week's topic is attention to feeling tone. And just to, before I do the recap, what I want to say is 2 housekeeping items about the forum. I am very much appreciating the engagement of folks who have been going on to the forum and posting thoughts and questions and poetry. And I want to say, one, please keep at it. Please continue to be in dialogue with each other, and feel free to add threads as you've been doing so far. And the other thing I want to say is, I'm sorry that the forum does this funny thing of like calling some people a junior member or some people a regular member. And it has this funny, at least that's what I see when I open up the forum, and maybe y'all are also seeing that too. So I just want to say, I think that's just about the number of posts or the number of times you've come to see the forum. Please don't be daunted by that in any way. You're not a junior member. Everyone gets an opportunity to post equally to the forum. All right. So have at it. And then the recap for this week. So attention to feeling tone. And the reason why this is the second topic is because our first topic was attention in activity. And one of the things that might start to happen as you begin to observe yourself in activity is that you might start to have reactions or responses to what you observed of yourself in activity, like frustration about what you see or what you can't see, like our friend who couldn't figure out which foot she put in her skirt first. Or you might feel a lot of joy and a lot of grasping and a lot of wanting what you see to be a particular way or to make progress in a particular way. Or you might feel some self-criticism about what you see, that it's not quite ideal. So related to this, I gave a little bit of instruction on the Sala Sutta, the Sutta of the arrow. And it's actually a sutta about 2 arrows, right? The first arrow is unpleasant feeling, and the second arrow is our unpleasant reaction to our unpleasant feeling. And talked a little bit about that and about how we can begin to, when we become aware of reactions, we can use that as a sort of marker or an alarm or something which reminds you to try to roll it back, to try to look back at the source of that reaction, of the contact that is associated with that, and what kind of contact it was, whether it was a pleasant or an unpleasant or a neutral contact, right? So there's this kind of retrospective way of looking at feeling tone. And then talking a little bit about the gap. So this perceived sense that maybe what the ways that you're speaking or thinking or acting aren't perhaps as skillful or as wholesome or as attentive as you might like. And the first thing that I said about that is be kind to yourself when you see that, or you will begin to turn away. Be generous with yourself. But also begin to allow that perception of a gap to show you why it's valuable to start to perceive feeling tones and the way that they drive the behavior. So this is a second form of looking at feeling tones as drivers of subsequent thoughts and speech and behavior. And then I brought forth the soon to be famous contact ball, right? So when you have some kind of sense organ that is met with a sense object and a consciousness as aware of it, then there is, like this light in this ball, some period of time, a brief moment of that form of consciousness. So eye consciousness or ear consciousness, that flavor of consciousness, if you will, which has a distinct beginning and persisting while changing and then ending. And then that brings us to the Salayatana Vibhanga, so the analysis of the six senses, which is a complex sutta, and we only touched into a little bit of that sutta. But basically, the Buddha saying you need to know the senses and the senses as the place of arising of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral feeling tone. And then he divides up the feeling tones into mundane and renunciate, or those that are related to the practice. And so it's a good reminder for us that even unpleasant feeling tones can be helpful to us in the practice. It's not that we always treat unpleasant in one way and pleasant in another way and neutral in another way, but that it depends on the character of it. So it's encouraging this third form, which is much more of seeing feeling as a phenomena, and a phenomena amidst a whole series of phenomena. So just another piece of the pie, if you will, another bite of the pie, maybe, to which you can choose your response or your reaction, if any. And then I closed with this koan from the Book of Serenity. And the book of, this is Thomas Cleary's translation of the Book of Serenity. It's a bit of a tome, but it's a good one. It's a classic in the Soto Zen tradition. And case 38 says, there is a person of no rank going in and out of the portals of your face at all times, actually, at all times. So it's referring to the way in which contact and feeling tones related to contact and all the thoughts that build up upon that, which is where described in the other khandas, which we'll talk more about next week, but we can also talk more about this week, how they are constantly functioning without any intervention of a self. That's the person of no rank. So with that, as you can see, it's a little bit more complex class than last week, and I imagine that you might have some questions. So let me, I think what I'll do is do it as we did last week, and leave everybody's mics muted, and you can just raise your biological hands if you have a question, and I'll take one at a time. And you can also, as I've said before, yeah, Doreen, you can be first. As I've said before, you can also interact with each other once we get started with the conversation. Please feel free to raise your hand and say you'd like to ask so-and-so if you could comment on their comment. That's also a polite thing to do. Okay, Doreen, you're up first. Let's see if I can unmute you here. Okay, there you go.
Am I unmuted?
You're unmuted.
Okay. So here's my confusion about this that we're talking about. So if frustration arises, is frustration a reaction, an emotion, a feeling? And where does that play into the, is it called Vedana? Vedana?
Yeah.
So I'm not exactly sure what triggers what.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say if I'm experiencing frustration about something, like something that maybe I want to get done, but uh, sometimes there's a problem with my energy level or my body or whatever, and I'm not up to the task. So that creates some sort of a frustration. Like, I'd really like to do X amount of gardening today, but I really have to take it easy or something. So my question is, upon rising, what comes first so that I can see it coming and maybe work with it?
Okay. So let's see. So let me start with the terminology a little bit, and this I think will help sort of parse it out a little bit more. Okay. So when we talk Vedana is what is the word, the Pali word for feeling tones. It's not the same as a feeling like an emotion. So it's only pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, or something on that scale. It's a kind of very primitive sense of a thing. So it's kind of, if we think about it in terms of like primitive human beings, if there was a rustle in the bush, you needed to look over there and see, is this thing going to eat you, or are you going to eat it, or is it neither of those two things? It's a very, very basic kind of negative or positive or sort of indeterminate neutral feeling about a thing. Okay. So when we talk about feeling, feeling is arising out of the contact, and it's one of the five khandhas. So these are two different frameworks that are describing a human experience. So the six sense functions is, the five typical ones that we think of: hearing and seeing and smelling and tasting and touch, and then thinking. So it's talking about body and it's talking about mind, right? In the same way, the khandhas is a slightly different framework that is also talking about body. So the first of the five khandhas is rupa, is the form body. And then Vedana is the second one. And it's the first of the mental ones. So there are four mental ones in the five khandhas. So based on the Vedana, so something rustles in the bushes, and you, for whatever reason, have a gut negative sense about that. Oop, that's trouble over there. But the oop, that's trouble over there is already several steps down the road, right? There's this basic negative feeling, and then there's a perception, trouble, or sound, or, right? There's usually like a word or some kind of identifier about what the thing is. And then on top, that's the sanya. And then on top of that, then we have a story about that. Oh, we might have some kind of a memory. Oh, the last time there was a rustle in that bush, it was a tiger. So that's trouble over there, right? So when you have frustration, back to your situation, right? When you have this, what you're having is a mental, right? A contact of the mind with the mind. You have a thought that you'd like to do this thing, and then you have another thought that says, no, but I can't do that thing, right? So that's a mental contact with a mental object. And then there's a feeling that came out of that, a negative feeling. Right? A negative, that's the Vedana, the tone of it, the tone of it. But frustration, right? Then you've gone to the next level. So identifying it as frustration, that's a perception. Then you've kind of related it to a memory, to an emotion, to a word that you have that belongs to this kind of certain kind of mental feeling. You see? So is it a reaction? Well, I would say frustration is often a reaction. Is often a reaction. And so what I was suggesting in the talk is if you've identified the frustration, then one way to work with the teachings around the feeling tone is to say, oh, okay, I have this frustration. Where did that come from? What contact did that come from?
Right.
What was the process? oh, I can go back and I can go back, quote unquote, right? Reflect
Mm.
and say, oh, I had this thought and then I had that thought, and those two thoughts conflict and give me a negative Vedana, and I get pulled into that negative Veda, just like the little boy who couldn't eat his ice cream, right? You get
Right.
swept into
Right.
that negative Vedana, into an emotion before you even had a chance. So
Right.
as you begin to get more facile with the practice, then maybe you can begin to identify the negative feeling tone right away. So you have the thought, and then you have the other thought, and then you have the right? And
Mm-hmm.
then you have, if there's a little bit of space in there, an option. Oh, so I can get frustrated about this, or I could decide to do something else with my day and be happy about the fact that, oh, now I have time to play with my scrapbook or whatever it is. That, you see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
There's more
Right.
potential for response instead of reaction at the, if we can get to the point of being more familiar with the feeling tone itself when it arises. But it's a very subtle thing. So that's why I give you 3 different ways of looking at it, right? Because the feeling tone, right, is kind of in space and time, it comes very close together with the thoughts and the emotions and things, because our minds work very quickly. Unless, and this is part of the reason why we do certain kinds of samatha, certain kinds of stilling meditation, when you can slow the mind down, then you can actually see this mechanism at work in situations, right, that don't move quite so quickly. So you can go, now I see, right? The tone,
Mm-hmm.
the negative tone tends to have this kind of energy to it,
Mm-hmm.
right? This kind of aversive energy to it. Does that help?
Right. I get. Yes, it's very helpful.
Great.
Yep. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Next. Okay, Genku. I think you're unmuted now.
Hi.
Hello?
Hello. Am I audible?
You are audible.
Good. Can you help me see the difference a little better between the first 2 ways of dealing with the Vedana? The gap and the retrospective way seem pretty close to one another. I'm not too clear on the difference.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Right. So I suppose that part of it is the the um, the retrospective way assumes that you've gotten a certain way down the road, versus in the gap kind of way of thinking about it, the way that I think about it anyway, or the way that I've personally practiced with it, is it's almost, there's like a in a good sense of the word, there's a self-consciousness happening, you know. And then so there's this behavior, and in the moment I'm going, okay, what, there was something, there was more, there was a different Vedana there than what I thought. I said, I'm in the process of saying such and such to you, and it's coming out snarky, let's say. That's a gap that I perceive in the moment, perhaps, that I'm saying it. You see? So the gap could be a kind of retrospective thing too. It can definitely be like much further down the road. You know, days later, you figure out that your boss is bummed out by something that you turned in a week ago, or something like that, or something that you said to a student or whatever. But 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 the I guess the other layer to add to this is that the more that you can see the gap, and the closer in time that is to the thing happening, then this is kind of what I'm saying, of like seeing the Vedana as a driver, like actually getting more motivated around awareness of the Vedana itself. So if I catch myself saying something to you and it's coming out snarky, in other words, then the next thing doesn't necessarily have to be that, right? Then I could be more conscious of the Vedana that I'm feeling. Oh, wait, there's some negative Vedana here that maybe could be expressed in a more wholesome way. So then the next thing, the next sentence even, or the next word even, could be something, right, that doesn't have that extra bite to it.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Okay, Adrian. Wait, you're not unmuted yet. Let's click one more time. Sometimes it takes a couple of tries on my end. Oh, there you go. Okay.
So the best part of your talk for me was the whole thing about the gap. And I kept thinking, oh, this is like in London, mind the gap,
Yes.
right? On the train. And I thought, I keep thinking about that, you know? And but then I went on the blog, your blog, and you talked about generosity and needing generosity in order to like be in the gap between your intention and what is really what you've actually accomplished, what you've actually done, the gap. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah.
Yes.
So I found that very inspiring to, well, first of all, to have someone acknowledge what I feel a lot of, which is I'm sort of falling short of what, you know, I hope to be, or the way I hope to behave, you know. Part to me wants to laugh at it a little bit, but part, you know, I really appreciated the blog part that talked about the having generosity towards oneself when trying to abide by ethics.
Mm-hmm.
And that I got the feeling like was saying everybody's falls short. You know, it's like until who knows when you're not going to have those experiences. And so it just normalized it for me. It gave me hope.
Yes.
It gave me a sense of, oh yeah, this is a thing. It's not just me, this is a thing. And so, yeah, thanks. I mean, if you'd like to comment any more about that, but I really appreciated that part.
Great. I'm glad that it's a useful way of thinking about it. And you hit the nail on the head, Adrian. I mean, this is really absolutely necessary, as far as I'm concerned, to stay on the path. Is our willingness to stay in that gap, to continue to observe that gap, to continue to do our best in the process of transformation of the practice, and yet know that there's more to be done. There's more to be done. There's more to be done. And it's not to say that it's not to say that we can consciously create all the steps on the path. The path also has a certain kind of momentum of its own and a certain mysterious way in which it works on us. But there is our part of it too, right? There are both of those two things. And to the extent that we can just be kind to ourselves and leave enough room to see those things instead of turning away from them, because that's what's the easiest thing to do, actually. The easiest thing to do is just to turn away from the discomfort of seeing that you fell short, or that you could do a little better, or that transformation that you thought was done isn't quite done.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Buddha refers to that very clearly in this sutta, this sutta on the sixth sense, the analysis of the sixth sense functions. So that was the main reason, actually, one of the main reasons for me bringing that forth, in addition to how he breaks apart the different feeling tones. His specific admonition that we can actually rely on that sense of oh my goodness, when am I actually going to be as wise and as skillful as, you know, the people that I admire on the path? We can actually turn toward that as a motivator, not wallow in it, you know, but turn toward, allow it to be a motivator for us. And just as you said, and a source of compassion too. Like, yeah, we're all in this boat together. We're all working on it. You know? Yeah, lovely. Which is a slightly different way of looking at the gap, Ken. So that's actually more like the retrospective way, huh? Definitely. More, although it can be immediate. Again, it's just, it depends on how, it depends partly on your mindfulness of what you're doing, and it depends also on how kind of blatant it is, you know. Yep. Great. Thanks, Adrienne, for your comment. Okay, next question or comment. Okay, I see Chris and then Tom. Okay.
Hi there.
Hi there.
So my question is going to take us backwards a little bit, because I was thinking about what you were responding to Doreen with, and similar things I was kind of wrestling with during the week as well, which is, what's the question here? It seemed to me, so I guess the question is, it sounds like what you said to Doreen, it is always linear in the sense of there's a contact, there's a Vedana, and then there's perception. But it feels to me sometimes that actually that the Vedana comes after the perception. But it sounds like maybe I'm missing the first Vedana. So in other words, like I perceive, like, let's use the example you used about there's a rustling. So I hear rustling, and then I imagine in my mind, oh, that rustling might be a tiger. That seems like it's after, in your description, it would be after the Vedana. But in my mind, it seems like it's before. So I think it's a tiger, and now I have, oh, that's really unpleasant because it's a tiger. Whereas if I thought it was a gentle cat, maybe I would have a different feeling tone arise. And so I feel like maybe I've kind of, that I'm missing something in sort of that sequence.
Yep. So there's two Vedanas that you're seeing there. There's the first Vedana of the rustle itself. And maybe that Vedana was more neutral, or sort of not neutral, but indeterminate, right? You weren't quite sure what it was. So it didn't have a positive or a negative at that point yet. And then you have a thought, and that thought creates another Vedana. That thought itself is an object to the mind organ, right? And that creates another sense of contact, and that's where the negative Vedana came up. You see what I'm saying? So it's very, very, it seems like it's all arising together. One of the things, again, if we can slow the mind down a lot, slow the mind down to the point where there's not a lot of verbalization actually, then you can start to actually see very, very clearly how there is like a tone even before there's a word, even before there's a, you know, even before you would say sound or rustle or anything. There's a tone, there's a kind of very, very, that's why I said it's like primitive, very low level, pre-verbal.
And that tone then is relative or absolute? In other words, what's
totally relative.
Can the tone
totally relative,
all right.
Right? So if the little boy, for example, who can't have his ice cream, has enough bad experiences with eating ice cream, it could be it often would be, that his Vedana around ice cream would change. He would see an ice cream and be like, ugh, keep that stuff away from me.
Right.
So it is not embedded in the object necessarily.
Yeah, and not fixed in our mind either, right? So it's totally, unreliable. In that sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's unreliable. Even if it's correct, it's unreliable, right? Because for the sake of conversation, even if you have, again, a negative experience around something, you may choose to do something different. So if it's a tiger in the bush, you may choose to be the photographer of the tiger and stay still, right? Even if it's correct. But so you see what I'm saying? So it's unreliable in the sense that you have a different agenda as well.
Right. Right. And then that different choice that you make then may cause that beta to be different the next time. Like, oh, the next time is like, oh, there really is a tiger in the bush this time.
Could be.
Yeah.
Or it could be that you stay afraid,
Okay.
you know, of tigers for your entire life, right? Like people who do public speaking. There are some people, or like Barbara Streisand is a classic example of this, right? She is terrified of singing in public, but she does it anyway. This is what she does for a living, right? And she is terrified of singing in public to this day. So she has some very strong Vedana there that's just unmovable, apparently.
It is what it is.
Yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, Tom. Let's see.
There.
Okay. Oh, sorry, I muted you again. Okay, let's try it again. Okay, there we go. Not yet. Oh, sorry. Okay.
How about now?
Now.
Is that good?
That's excellent.
Okay. Thank you. This is such a wonderful teaching. Thank you. And I have a lot of questions, but I'll start with one.
Okay.
Could you talk a little bit more about the difference between feeling tones and emotions, and where emotions come into play in the process?
Yes. Yes. So let's talk about the 5 again, and then maybe it'll make more sense. So you have the body, right? The kind of organ where the contact is happening somewhere. And then you have the Vedana, which is the feeling tone, this kind of very primitive sense of whether it's okay or not, or you can't tell. And then you have Sanya, the perception, which is very closely related to memory and is usually something simple, like a word that identifies the thing, rose, right? You see the rose, you have some kind of feeling tone to it. You have some kind of sense of it's okay or not. And then you have the word rose. And then you might have a feeling about the rose, an emotion. So that's a sankhara. That's more of that's a mental formation. That's the 4th. And then you have consciousness. So the consciousness, there's the base consciousness, which is kind of awareness, and the receptivity of the other things going on. Okay. And there's a flavor of that consciousness sometimes relative to a particular sense organ, has a flavor of seeing the rose. So an I form of consciousness flavor. Okay. So, but the sankhara is, the emotions are sankharas. They're a little bit more complex, and they, one way that you can tell that they're more complex is because there's usually a physical component. So there's an interactivity happening between the body and the mind that's more than just the initial hit, more than just the initial hit of the seeing it. And it's a feeling, you know, an emotion. It has all kinds of shades of meaning, right? It has all kinds of shades of meaning. If we say, like, bummed out versus despairing, right? There's a tremendous shade of meaning in between those things, right? Whereas Vedana doesn't have that kind of complexity to it. It's just the very, very simple sense of on the spectrum of pleasant or unpleasant. Yeah.
So emotions would be in the choice process.
Yes. Yes. Although they don't always seem like that, do they?
Well, yes and no, but yeah. But I think of a couple of examples, like current things going on with social justice and protest actions, and the emotion of anger,
Yes.
and how that can be a motivating emotion
Yes.
within that context.
Yeah.
And if one is skillful and has trainings and can channel it in the correct way, it can be a powerful emotion. Or that sadness and a community grieving can be a real bonding kind of experience. So those kinds of emotions are not the kind of feeling tones
Right.
that you're acting. Okay, that's very helpful.
Yep. Yep. Great. And just to say a little
Thank you.
thing, I'm glad that you bring this up so we can talk a little bit more about this. So anger that's happening in response to injustice, right? Anger that's happening in response to injustice. It's not new, but we're certainly hearing a lot of those kind of cries these days in the US and around the world in different ways. Huh? And so most of the Buddhist teachings around anger are pointing at the damage that anger can cause, pointing at the painful nature of anger, because anger is called one of the poisons, right? It hurts. When you're angry, it literally hurts your mind and your body. And so the Buddha likened it to, some of you have heard me use this before, the Buddha likened it to trying to get angry at someone else or express your anger at someone else is like picking up a burning coal. Who's going to get hurt first? You are. You're going to get hurt first. In the case of this kind of anger, though, I have to say that what I'm really feeling these days, and one of the reasons why I and my sisters and many people that I know, including you, Tom, and Dana, and other folks here on this screen, are involved in speaking out about social injustices and oppression and problems, social problems, is because there are times, I believe, when the cost of not expressing the anger is too high. So in the case of George Floyd's death, I felt that the cost of not expressing my sadness and my disappointment and my frustration with the system and this very singular event of this poor human being losing his life was too high to be not expressed. Did I finish that sentence well? Felt like it was too costly not to say something, knowing that it has a bit of a cost on me to have those feelings and stay with that unpleasant feeling, right? So it's a good place to talk about, those kind of expressions are necessary, but I hope that we can also learn how to have these dialogues and these expressions without so much pain and without so much anger. We could really learn how to do that. I mean, I've been in situations in my life, and this talk didn't get recorded that I did during the Spirit Rock retreat, but I've been in situations in my life, like leaving an abusive marriage, where I needed to muster up a lot of anger in order to be willing to make the change that was needed, So I get that. And it had a tremendous personal cost. I also cannot deny that it had a tremendous personal cost. So I just put that out there for conversation because I think it's good for us to talk about the feelings that are coming up, the emotions that are coming up right now around this.
I'd like to ask one more kind of related question.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of in the same context, with becoming more aware of attention and all the associated experiences with that, I have in recent times become more and more aware of what I think is part of what we're talking about, which is kind of a background experience of anxiety. It's like I feel like I've become aware of kind of a very low level hum of anxiety that I carry, that I feel like is related to events going on and my experiences of them. And would that be a feeling tone or an emotion? How would you
Yeah. So,
consider that?
basically, if you study it very carefully, then something that seems a mental state that seems to have a continuity like that is actually more of a repetition. It's like the bird, I think of, like, I live in the forest, so I think of these metaphors. Like the bird up there,
The
tweet,
same.
tweet, 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 tweet. You live in the forest too, right? Tweet,
Yeah.
tweet, 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 the same note, right? For a good long time. And right? But they are coming close together. So there's a feeling, a sense that you have that it's always with you, right? But it's not actually that way. The way that the Buddha described it was more like, no,
Okay.
it's actually, it's one hit, and then it's another hit, and it's another hit, and it's another hit. And in the case of the anxiety, I think is a very good example of a case where it might be helpful to try to roll it back to the contact itself. Is it an anxiety around a negative feeling tone, or is it anxiety that's coming out of a neutral feeling tone? Because a lot of times these kind of indeterminate or uncertainty about the world can give a kind of sense of agitation that doesn't get addressed, because our basic fundamental tendency, as the Buddha pointed out in the sixth sense analysis here, our basic tendency toward neutral feeling tone is to turn away, to just ignore it. No, it's not there. It's not there. We don't like uncertainty. And it's not even that we dislike uncertainty, it's just that we don't want to look there, So it's good for you to sort of use the rollback, I would say, Tom, in that case, and see, because it is a level of emotion, even though it's a low, as you're saying, it's kind of a low hum level. But to see if you could identify some points of contact in there, and then the tone that was associated with the very low, the very fundamental contact.
It's really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you. Okay, Sue, you are up next, and then Margaret has a hand up.
I was really curious about, and I thought it was so courageous for you to make the connection between sexual abuse in Buddhist communities and the unwillingness to spiritually grow by looking at that gap. And I'd be very interested in you talking about that a bit more.
Wow, yeah, it's a very complex subject, that one. But part of the dynamic, if I just kind of relate it very simply to the feeling tone conversation, part of the dynamic that happens, I think, in some communities is that there's a person who has been accorded a lot of positive feeling tone, a lot of respect, and there's a kind of underlying pleasant feeling about that person, being around that person, being associated with that person, how that person talks, how they walk, etc. There's a lot of positive going toward that person. But that then reflects back on the one who's offering it, so to speak, right? Like, I have an association with this wonderful person too. And I was the one who decided that this was a wonderful person. So then when that person isn't quite so wonderful and there's a big gap that starts to develop in their behavior, like they start abusing their students, then in order to actually acknowledge that gap, you have to acknowledge that it's a gap in your own judgment about them, right? You have to acknowledge that there was a gap in your own perception of who they were, or how they're actually behaving, who they are. And so that can be hard to receive, right? That can be hard to receive, because then you're saying, not only do you lose the whatever kind of underlying psychological benefit of being associated with somebody you think is wonderful, but you also then have to address the judgment, the judgment of the judgment, so to speak. You have to address your views. You have to be willing to let go of your old views about that. So for the person who's actually doing those behaviors, it's the same thing. They have views about themselves, about where they are in the practice, about who they are, what their ideals are, what they're manifesting, what they're showing. And that unfortunately can get very tied up with power, or very tied up with kind of understandings of, like crazy wisdom, or various other ways that it's talked about. That can get very, very twisted by other motivations. And if they're not willing to look at their own gap also, right, then they kind of will do lots of things to struggle to hold on to their authority and their power and their titles and their, and to keep people from talking about the gap and perceiving the gap. So there are very strong motivations on both sides of that equation. Do you see what I'm saying? There are very, very strong motivations on maybe all sides of that equation, you could say, that require people to have a lot of humility in order to break open and be willing to see the reality of that situation, the gap that's happening, the ethical gap that's being created. So it's understandable, because we want people to be good. We want our teachers to be teachers and to be admirable people. It's, in some ways, it's a very, very kind of understandable dynamic, but it gets all twisted up, and sadly a lot of people get hurt in the process. That's the hard part. Yeah. Okay, I see a hand. Is that okay, Sue? Is that complete for you? Okay. Olivia, you would be next.
I just remembered, I think someone else had already raised their hand.
Oh, did somebody else? Oh, yes, Margaret. Okay, Margaret, you're next. Sorry. Let's unmute you. Okay, there you go.
I was moving back closer to the physical and to what happens before what you were talking about. And I was thinking about the work of Dr. Candace Pert, who was a neuropsychologist. And she and her husband were among the very, very earliest developers of psychotropic drugs. And they learned that there were receptors for these drugs, not just in the brain, but throughout the body. And she came to say the body is the subconscious mind. And as you were talking, I was thinking of the physical indicators, the visual, the sound, the sense, that she said in a time of danger, you will jump back or move away before the conscious mind knows what the danger is.
Mm-hmm.
And even within what you were talking about just now, there are often people there in the Sangha who sense something is wrong.
Yes.
And they're picking it up literally picking it up through physical cues.
Gives me
They
goosebumps.
don't know what they are. They don't know what it means.
Yeah.
But I've never heard it in the vocabulary that I'm learning in this class of feeling tone and all those other words. So I'm using subconscious mind, and because those are the words I know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd love to hear you on that.
Wow, wonderful sharing. Thank you, Margaret. I hadn't heard that before, but it is that I am aware of that dynamic. Yes, that there can be physical responses before, we've actually even registered what the thing is, startle response and other things like that. In fact, not to make it funny, but just to say, when I worked in the hospital, I kept a little bit more hair because of the startle response, because I would get, some people would have a sort of startle response at it. And so I started having a little bit more hair just out of compassion. Oh, thanks, Margaret. So Olivia, yes, thank you. Olivia, I am going to ask you to ask your question or state your comment, and then after Olivia's, we have a short amount of time left, and I want to do about a little bit of a 10-minute or maybe even 7-minute breakout groups process with you. So Olivia, how about it? Let's see.
Thank you. I just quick clarification on the analysis of the 6 sense fields.
Yes.
There are these interior sense fields, exterior classes of consciousness, and classes of consciousness.
Yes.
Right on the page. And I just want to make sure I'm understanding these correctly. Like the interior sense field, the sense organ itself.
Right. So he lists them. The Buddha lists them in the subsequent paragraphs there. So he says 6 internal sense media should be known as the eye medium, the ear medium. So that is the organ.
And then the second one is the sense.
The second one is the sense, the external sense media means the object. So like light to the eye or sound to the ear.
So it's, okay.
That's the external.
The object.
The internal part is the organ itself. The external is the object. And then the class of consciousness is this is what I was referring to as like a flavor of consciousness, or that thing, the light that the ball does, right? So when there's a awareness that's present at the time that an object meets the correct organ, right? So the sound has to meet the ear, not the eye, but meet the ear. And then there's a consciousness of what the Buddha called the ear consciousness that comes from that, a sort of wave, if you will, or flavor of the consciousness in that moment that relates to the ear.
Contact, and I was confused why there's both consciousness and contact.
Right. So the contact is just when those 3 things are coming together. So he's saying there are these 3 things, and contact is the point, boom, when it all kind of clicks together.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for mapping. It was just from your language, it made sense. And then when I went to read it, I was trying to map your language on and wanted to make sure I got it right. That makes sense now. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thanks for hanging in there with all the language. I understand that there's a lot of material this week, so good. Thanks, Olivia. Okay, so what I would like to do is a brief breakout group session, and what I am going to ask you to do is I'm going to randomly pair you up into groups of 2. I'm aware that there are a couple of couples who are on different feeds here, so if you accidentally get paired with your partner, I apologize. You can just pop back out, or you can go ahead and do it with your partner as you wish. It's really literally random. Zoom is picking who gets to be with who. So what I would like to do is, when you get to your room, so it'll be just the 2 of you seeing each other on the screen, then you'll have about, let's say 6 minutes, because you'll have each 3 minutes or so to talk, and that's quite a long time for this exercise for each person. So pick who will go first, and then one person will be the speaker and one person will be the listener. And what the speaker is going to do is the speaker is going to see if they can identify feeling tones somewhere in the body and just speak them out. So like you might say unpleasant feeling in the knee because your knee hurts. So you might say pleasant in the mouth because you still have a taste of your cup of tea, or whatever it is. Do you see what I'm saying? So you're just going to kind of sit there and look for the feeling tones. And if you can't find them, that's totally fine. Then you just can sit there quietly and enjoy each other's company. Yeah, so let's see, how you'll have to time each other for the 3 minutes. Can you do that? Can everybody do that? Because then you'll need to switch. Yeah, so people showing me their phones. So then you'll switch, and the person who is speaking will be the listener. And then for 3 full minutes, which is a long time, then you can just identify feeling tone in the body. All right, see if you try this exercise for 6 minutes. And then when you're done, there's a way you can pop out and come back to the main screen, and I will pop everybody back out at some point when I think the 6 minutes are up anyway, in case you can't figure out how to do that. Okay, and then we'll come back and we'll debrief. We'll have a little bit of chatting about how it went, right? And if you're not game, then you can just say no. So Zoom will bring up a thing and saying you're being put into a room. And if you really, really don't want to do this event somehow, you don't want to do this, then you just turn it down. Ignore that thing. Say no. Okay, don't go into the breakout room. All right, bear with me. This is my first try at this. 2 people per room. All right, off we go. Enjoy. Oh, no. Wait.
I don't know why I came back.
Okay,
I
hold
think
on.
we all came back.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Okay. No, that's not right.